believes that this will not continue. I love
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. The John Kerry Express is shuttling through the Middle East in search of peace. Once again, a U.S. administration claims to be a fair broker to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. After 44 years of occupation and colonization of Palestinian land, what can we expect, if anything, from the Obama administration? Isn't it time to reckon with the reality on the ground? That is, the one-state solution. To Crosstalk the John Kerry visit to the Middle East, I'm joined by Adina Friedman in Washington. She is a professor at the American University School of International Science. Also in Washington, we have Jason Isaacson. He is the American Jewish Committee Director of Government and International Affairs. And in Philadelphia, we cross to Susan Abu Hawa. She is a writer, political commentator, and author of the book Mornings in Jenin. Okay, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Susan, we just had a visit by the U.S. Secretary of State to the Middle East. Anything new? Did you hear anything new? Anything promising?
Unfortunately, no, Peter. And frankly, I think we need to stop talking about this fantasy peace process. 20-some years ago, Palestinians made an unprecedented compromise to relinquish our legal and historic right to over 78% of our historic homeland, with the understanding that an independent Palestinian state would be established in the remaining 22%. In this time where, while this process was going on, of course it turned out not to be a peace process at all, but instead it's become a process of ethnic cleansing. It's been a process whereby Israel has continued this rapacious theft of natural resources belonging to Palestinians, principally land and water. It's been a process of Israel continuing to build the infrastructure of this Israeli apartheid, of Israeli-only roads, Jewish-only housing, color-coded license plates, endless permits, checkpoints, and so forth. So I think, everybody knows this two-state idea is a lie, and for some reason, everybody keeps engaging this ridiculous discourse, and it frankly just serves Israeli imperialist interests of wiping us off the map. And one only needs to look at the map to see the truth in what I'm saying, because as of now,
okay, let's get a counterpoint. Let's get a counterpoint. Jason,
historic home Palestine
Jason, jump
remains.
in. I'm sure you don't agree with that. Go ahead,
Peter. Thank you for. Almost every sentence, but thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Look, the Palestinians should have a state, and they should have it in that land. And they had an opportunity to have that at the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. When the UN partition plan was adopted in the 1940s, it provided for a Palestinian state alongside Israel. The Palestinians and the Arab states rejected that, went to war against Israel. Let's remember the facts. So yes, there should be a Palestinian state. There are Palestinian Arabs living in that land. They can have a state when they return to the bargaining table and negotiate for a state. But to talk about apartheid, to talk about rapacious this and that, colonization, is just nonsense. I mean, the fact is that Israel has a right to exist in peace and security with its neighbors. The Palestinians have rejected that. The Arab states have backed them up and gone to war against Israel. It's time to get to the bargaining table and put that history behind us.
Adina, go ahead, jump in, weigh in. We have very different points of view here.
Okay, so well, mine probably is the most of a merger between the two. I agree that there have been problems with futile attempts at peace, and that the two-state solution is looking more and more blurry and to some impossible. I think that if we just look at historical facts and figures and dates, we will see quite different narratives about who said what to whom on what date and where the story begins, and that's problematic. I think we need to move forward addressing those historical grievances, not ignoring the fact that there are historical grievances, serious ones that have not been addressed, but there are a number of different accounts. So in other words, when we talk about historical homelands, we obviously have two competing claims to a place, to the same place. I think, though, a one state, while many Jews would most likely disagree with this, and many Palestinians would prefer that solution, I don't see it as a viable one at this point, but I personally don't see a problem with talking about it as a longer term possibility. I just don't see it happening as the first stage in anything. And the two-state solution is by no means a perfect solution. It also doesn't do justice to the Palestinians in Israel. It's problematic in many ways, but I'm not sure there's anything better. And as someone who's concerned with that region and actually grew up in that region, giving up hope that there's any solution would be a really problematic thing.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of people
Susan,
working
where do
for a
we go
solution.
from here? Where do we go from here? Give me a roadmap.
Look, I want to just make something very clear. Of the three of us in this conversation, I'm the only one with personal familial lineage dating back centuries. The only reason, for example, Jason, thinks he even has a say in this matter is his notion of Jewish entitlement, which is the problem. I mean, we are the indigenous population. He thinks that we need to talk with our oppressors, with white Americans and white Europeans who feel entitled to the resources belonging to the brown people in Palestine. And frankly,
Whoa,
I don't accept that.
Peter.
I reject that. That is my homeland. That's my homeland, and I don't need to negotiate
Susan.
with people like him
Susan.
for basic human rights. I don't need to negotiate for freedom. Palestinians
Susan,
should not have to do that.
Susan,
Jason,
you and I are
not
not, you and I are not
less human.
negotiating.
Jason?
You and I are
No.
not-
They have their boots at our necks, and they're asking us to negotiate. And the irony is that we did precisely that. We tried doing that and made an unprecedented historic compromise, relinquishing 78% of Palestine. And it's ridiculous to talk about a two-state solution now. Look at the map, for God's sakes. And besides that, I mean, one successive Israeli government after another has affirmed in no uncertain terms that they will not allow the emergence of a viable Palestinian state. I mean, this is their words, and they continue to say
I need Jason to jump in
and
here.
yet
I
we're
need
just gonna
Jason to
pretend
jump
like
in,
we're going to
please.
talk about the two-state
jump in.
solution.
My Lord, Peter, I mean, I can't keep track of all of the things that have been said and counter every one of them. It's just not possible. They're coming thick and fast. But listen,
Likewise.
I'm not negotiating on behalf of, excuse me? I'm not negotiating on behalf of Israel. I'm not negotiating on behalf of any state. I'm simply demonstrating the fact that there have been Jews in that land. It is the Jewish homeland for thousands of years. To somehow pretend that there's no Jewish connection to that land when we have so much evidence, archaeological evidence.
Pretend like
if you
we
discount the
haven't been
Bible
there.
even, just look at the
There have
facts.
been Jews-
It's clear that there have been Jews in that land. I'm not saying,
throughout the Middle
excuse me,
East.
Susan. Susan, excuse me. I'm not saying that there haven't
course there
been
have been
Arab
Jews.
populations living in that land. Of course there have been.
You're lying.
But,
You
but,
wanna
but
pretend
Jews have
like
a
every
claim
Jew
to that
has a
land
right
at
to be
least as
there.
legitimate,
You're
if not more
lying.
legitimate than any other claims. Peter, I'm sorry.
Jews have
Is
a
it possible
claim
to have
to
this kind of a
Egypt.
conversation,
Jews have
Peter?
been in Egypt for thousands of years. You want to take Egypt too?
Okay, Adina, jump in. Go ahead.
No, this is such
In
an
Washington,
invasion.
Adina, jump in.
This is so
Adina,
invasion.
fair time.
Do you discount
Fair time.
So I think-
do you discount
Fair
the
time.
entire history of that
There are
region?
Adina,
My God.
fair time. Adina.
Okay, there are competing claims here, obviously, and some people think they're totally unequal. Susan thinks that, obviously. Personally, I grew up in Israel, and most of my family and friends who are there at this point in life have no other. That's where they were either born or raised, usually born, and they have no other citizenship or place to go either. So, in other words, regardless of the fact that there have been some historical injustices in
And
many
nobody
directions,
is saying they need
there
to
are
leave.
also people
but what
living
I'm saying
there.
is that they don't get to kick us
But what-
out.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they
Nobody
need to kick
is
out, and I
saying
actually
they
think
need to
that
leave.
if
Don't put
nothing.
words in my mouth. Don't put words in my mouth.
No, I didn't say that. I think one of the things, again, we have
Okay.
tensions between what are collective rights. If we look at nationalism as a collective movement and collective rights of people, then every collective that claims it's a nationalism should have similar rights. But regardless of this, I mean, it's a huge topic I won't have time to get into now. But I agree that Many obstacles have been put up by many Israeli governments as far as actually establishing a two-state solution or a Palestinian state. I think, again, further back in history, there were different parties who refused different international initiatives for various reasons, why the Arabs rejected it initially and the Jews rejected things afterwards, for all kinds of reasons. The point of the matter is that there are two peoples there and many individuals.
You have to stop this language.
Susan, weigh in. Susan, go ahead.
You have to stop.
Let her finish. I have objections as well, but I'm letting her at least finish her thoughts.
It's such mendacious
Peter,
language.
this is insane.
I mean, this kind of language makes it sound like that, these are just two equal parties who are disagreeing. You need to stop doing that. It's dishonest. This is a situation of ethnic cleansing. Palestinians are literally being wiped off the map, and you know it.
Susan,
we are
ethnic
being
cleansing is not at
most
all
of us
the
are
issue. We're
in
not talking
refugee
about
camps that are
ethnic
not fit
cleansing.
for
We're not
rats.
talking about racism. We're talking about two peoples with claims
you don't
to
want to talk
and with
about that.
historical
Of course you
connections
don't
to
want
the
to talk
same
about that, but
land.
that's the reality.
And to somehow deny that there is a Jewish connection to the land of Israel is just a complete fabrication. And the archaeological evidence, aside from the biblical evidence, aside from what so many millions of people around the world know to be the facts, is just denying the reality.
All right, Susan, before we go to the...
Sorry, Susan, you said that the Jewish people have no connection to that land, and that's just false.
I'm not going to allow you to put words in my
false.
mouth. I never said there was no Jewish connection. What I'm saying is that there is no white European, white American connection to that land, and that includes you. Jews have been all over the Middle East for centuries and millennia.
I'm not negotiating for Israel. I'm simply laying out the facts, for God's
sakes. That doesn't mean you get to
sakes.
take Egypt or Iraq, for that matter. So stop this mendacious talk. Like as if we were never there. You're talking about thousands of years of Jewish history. It is far more.
All right,
likely
I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Israel and Palestine. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing John Kerry's visit to the Middle East. Okay, I'd like to go back to Adina in Washington. Is the United States a fair broker in this case, in this conflict?
I think to assume that the United States is either neutral, unbiased, totally fair is a mistake. It isn't. It hasn't been historically. Different parties feel, Palestinians would agree with this more probably. Israelis, it's mixed. But I'm not sure, again, what the alternative would be. Because if we go back to our previous discussion, we could have parties pursue what they see as absolute justice for their party, but that would probably entail some injustices to other parties as well. So I'm not saying that we need to ignore everything that happened. On the contrary, what happened thus far is extremely important. But if we are assuming that nobody's leaving that area and that we're stuck there together, and we need to find something that reasonably accounts for all the injustices that have been going on, and that includes Israel stopping to do or starting to do a lot of things. I'm not denying that. We need some kind of external help, and Israeli feelings about U.S. involvement are mixed. You have the government that's still, trying to play its usual games, like various governments have, and but you have the public that's also split. I think Obama's speech spoke to a lot of Israelis. I know that in the peace camps, which are broader than you usually know, it did resonate. But at the same time, between most Israelis understanding that there needs to be a two-state solution and wanting the U.S. to help that happen, and between the Israeli government actually doing it, it's not exactly the same thing.
All right, Jason, how do you react to that?
The U.S. isn't.
If I may, Peter.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jason, please.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. I disagree somewhat. I think that when President Obama visited Israel last month, and also the West Bank, a very important visit to Ramallah, he made statements that were significant to both populations, and I think he identified with the Palestinian desire and need for...
Well, Jason, Obama's a good speech maker. He can give a speech. He can give a speech, but what about policy?
I would love to finish.
What about policy, though? It's a good speech. We all agree.
I'm sorry.
But what about policy?
Go ahead. I think the policy... Peter, I think the policies pursued by this administration have been the correct ones. They have demonstrated solidarity and understanding of Israel's special security needs, considering, by the way, the incredibly unstable neighborhood in which it exists. And let's not forget, please, the fact that Neighboring Israel is Syria, where 70,000 people have been killed in the last 2 years, with, frankly, unfortunately, the support of the Russian government, that's the Assad regime.
Well,
Let's not forget the security
the Russian government
that Israel
supports the
faces.
Syrian
It is trying to make
Syrian
progress.
people.
Israel has again. Oh, please. Again and again, this administration has demonstrated its solidarity with the
Israel's
people
role
of
in
Israel
Syria
as they
too, but
face
that's
this
not the
instability in their
program.
neighborhood. And their desire for peace. And their desire for peace with the
thank you,
Palestinians.
Peter, for
and the
bringing that
commitment
up,
of successive governments to a two-state solution.
Susan, jump in.
This is not. They have not been pulled kicking. They have not been pulled kicking and screaming. They are supportive of again and again a two-state solution.
A two-state solution in which they continue to steal more and more Palestinian land. That's. I mean, that is just. It's
in which the Palestinians have continued to resist coming back to the bargaining table.
It is Susan's turn to speak.
In which the Palestinians have continued to resist.
Susan's turn to speak. Susan.
And you know.
I was just giving her a piece of her own medicine, but please go ahead.
I mean, it's funny. Like both of your guests, Peter, are using this very mendacious language. I mean, on the one hand, Jason talks about Israel's special security needs. In fact, Israel has bombed and attacked unprovoked nearly every one of its neighbors, and I mean, it is the one that has been creating security issues throughout the Middle East for decades, and it also ignored an offer from all Arab nations in the region to make peace with it if it would simply comply with international law vis-a-vis Resolution 242, which would allow for the establishment of a Palestinian state along the 67 borders, and of course it ignored it. So the security Israel's security issue comes from its own greed and theft and of other people's resources. And secondly, there is no way. I mean, it's silly to even ask the question whether or not the U.S. is an honest broker. I mean, everybody knows it's not. I mean, and Obama just allowed for another $40 billion aid package to Israel. I mean, this is on top of the aid we've been giving them for decades, and this comes at a time when American schools are closing throughout the country. I mean, it's outrageous the level of influence that Israel exerts on American policies, both domestically and foreign policies. And the other mendacious language in this conversation is saying, is speaking in general terms that, oh, hey, well, Israel needs to stop a few things, and it's not perfect, whatever. But let's just say what those things are. Israel is a brutal, savage military power that has inflicted the most technological, persistent violence against a principally unarmed indigenous population.
Ooh, let's talk about President Assad, please, Susan.
Pretend like these are like
about a little comparison here with its neighbors?
that they need to address.
Jason, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
You know what? See, this is funny.
My God,
because
Peter.
You know what?
Let's go to Jason.
Go to Jason
in Washington.
So he's pointing to people in the region.
You
know what? You won't get any argument. You won't get any argument from me about brutality of Arab nations or whatever. So you know what? But that's not a legitimate defense by saying, oh, hey, well, other people are doing it, so why can't we do it?
Jason, go ahead.
Because frankly, I think, frankly, of the states in the region that have respected human rights, considering the enormous challenges that they have faced, rocket assaults from the south, rocket assaults from the north, instability on all of its borders, terrorism that has killed hundreds and hundreds of Israelis over the years, to say that somehow Israel's behaving in this brutal fashion just denies the reality. It denies the reality.
Adina, jump in.
Peter,
I need to go to Adina. I want fair time for everyone. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm not arguing with many of the things or most of the things that Susan is saying about Israel's actions. I have serious problems with Israel's actions.
Thank you.
However, at the same time, there are also Israelis who have come up. I know it's taken them forever to react to the Arab Peace Initiative, which wasn't perfect, but was a good starting point at least to talk about. There is the counter-Israeli Peace Initiative, which people have been trying. No, Israeli Peace Initiative more recently. There are things like the Geneva Initiative, other efforts that show that Israelis and Palestinians and other Arabs, some of them can actually sit and think through some of these issues and are not, do not accept the situation or Israeli actions, etc. The problem is, again, that the governments have not adopted these, and not enough of the grassroots are pushing enough to adopt these changes. But at the same time, again, even though I agree with many of the things Susan is saying in principle, I also happen to be Israeli, and I also happen to know what a lot of Israeli people go through, which doesn't matter that it might be Israeli government's fault. Nevertheless, there are millions of people in Israel as well, actually Jews and Arabs, who go through, who also are victims of this situation, and whatever solution we come to doesn't need to obliterate Palestinian rights or Palestinian identity by any means, but it also has to take into account that there are also other millions of people there, most of whom actually would prefer to live in peace with their neighbors. We have leaderships, not just the current one, but most of them until now.
They want to live in peace with Jewish privilege. That's the problem. The problem is you can't live in peace and expect to have Jewish entitlement and privilege at the same time. That is the problem. That is precisely the problem.
Okay, that Israelis
want to live in a nation that
accords
privilege, economic privilege, psychological, social privilege to people just for being Jewish. So you can't have it both ways.
Israelis who have a history of being attacked need to have security.
Let's go to Jason. Let's go to Jason. Fair time, Jason.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think that Israelis who have been attacked over the decades by their neighbors need to have security, and a peace process that produces security between the peoples is the guarantor that we are asking for. And in fact, if the Arab Peace Initiative had been presented in a way that demonstrated its understanding of Israel's security needs and meeting Israel at the table instead of dumping this Arab Peace Initiative on Israel from afar, I think it would have had a different reaction. But the fact is that there is growing, as Adina says, there is growing agreement or understanding within Israel that the possibilities do exist if the Arab states come to the table with, if the Palestinians with Arab backing come to the table with Israel. There is definite a cross-section of agreement within the Israeli public that this is the way forward. This is the only way forward.
Adina, you want to reply? Let's go to Adina. Fair time. Adina, go ahead.
Oppressors for freedom.
Please, Adina.
Okay. I would say some of the Israelis, back to what Jason was just saying, some of the Israelis would frame that differently. So the people who have proposed some of these agreements don't put the main onus on Palestinians. They take the responsibility as well and put it also largely on the Israeli government. So there are different opinions among Israelis, but those who are pursuing agreements very strongly also acknowledge that Israeli governments have been a main obstacle. Not the only one, but a main one. But back to the issue of privilege.
But clearly, it's not enough Israelis. Otherwise, you wouldn't continue to keep electing one.
We have 30 seconds left. I'm going to give the last word to Susan. Last word to Susan. 30 seconds. Go.
I mean, that's to say that isn't really true, because Israelis have been electing one right-wing government after another, putting one war criminal at the helm after another. And you know what? As an indigenous, violated people, the world should not demand that we sit down and negotiate with our oppressors for basic freedom and basic human rights. And Jason's only reason that he thinks that he has any say in this matter is simply born of his sense of Jewish entitlement, and that's the problem.
Okay, fascinating discussion. I'm sorry we've run out of time. Many thanks today to my guests in Washington and in Philadelphia. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, Crosstalk rules.